As we discovered when we did our outside warm-up, lines that have the same slope are parallel lines. So they have the same rise over run, or if it's in y equals mx plus b, if you have an equation in y equals mx plus b and another equation in y equals mx plus b, then the m's are the same, the slopes. So we want them to have the same slope. So if we look at this first example, and we find the slope of every one of these lines, so y equals 4/3 x plus 3, that has a slope of 4/3 because m is 4/3. In y equals 2, we don't even have our x. It's supposed to be mx. Since we don't have the x, our m is 0. And a y equals equation, remember, will look like this, a 0 slope. Okay, in our next equation here, we have m equals 4/3 again. And in the last one, we have a y equals equation where our slope will be 0 because there's no x again. And the slope is always before x, the coefficient of x. Okay, so that means it says identify which lines are parallel. Well, the lines that have the same slope. So these two are parallel to each other. So y equals 2 is parallel to y equals -3. This symbol that I made right here is parallel. Okay. And y equals 4/3 x plus 3 is parallel to y equals 4/3 x minus 5, again, because they have the same slope. Perpendicular lines, however, are lines that intersect to form right angles, but that's kind of your elementary definition. What I need you guys to know now is that the lines have negative reciprocal slopes. And I'm not going to define that yet, negative reciprocal slopes. But I am going to show you the perpendicular slope of each one of the slopes down below here. So if my slope is 1/2, the perpendicular, which is an upside down T to represent perpendicular, the perpendicular slope is -2/1 or -2. For the slope of m equals -3/4, the perpendicular slope is positive 4/3. Maybe you can see how I'm getting from one to the other, but if not, that's okay. And in the next slope, -5, which we know is -5/1, the perpendicular slope becomes positive 1/5. So now I'll tell you the rule for negative reciprocal slope. What you need to know about it is that you flip the fraction and flip the sign. Flip the fraction and flip the sign to get the negative reciprocal slope. And if you want a way to check it, some of you are at that advanced stage of checking everything now, if you actually multiply 1/2, the first slope, times -2/1, you'll get -1. And then if you do the next one, -3/4 times 4/3, you'll get -1 because every negative reciprocal multiplies to -1. So if you want a way of checking, these should multiply to -1, the slopes. Okay, so this time it says identify which lines are perpendicular. So again, we're looking for negative reciprocal slopes, basically the flip. Flip the fraction, flip the sign. That's what we're looking for. If they're flip of each other, then they are perpendicular lines. So x equals -2. The slope of this is undefined. And it's kind of something you might just want to memorize, to be honest, because an x equals equation will look like this, an undefined line, every time. And the y equals equation, I told you before, will look like this every time. This slope is 0. It has no x in it. So it's 0x, which means that m is 0. All right, and our next one, this is a y equals mx equation. Y equals mx. There's no plus b in there, but that's okay. M is still -4. And for the last one, this is actually point slope formula. This is y minus y1 equals m parentheses x minus x1. And so I'm looking at the slope of this one, which is 1/4. And if I could actually drag, I wish I could. Let me see if I can make this work better. That's right. Okay. So if I take this line right here, this zero slope line, and I bring it straight up, notice that these make perpendicular lines. So when you have an undefined slope and a zero slope, they are perpendicular. So these two equations are perpendicular to each other. So I can write it as x equals -2 is perpendicular to y equals 1. And for our next two, these are actually perpendicular to each other as well. Because if m is -4, and you do the flip of that, the negative reciprocal, it would become positive, and the 4/1 would become 1/4, positive 1/4. And that's what we have for our second slope, m equals 1/4. So y equals -4x is perpendicular to y plus 2 equals 1/4 x plus 1. And if it's bothering you, this point slope form, you guys know how to get rid of that. You can distribute, and then you can isolate y. So y equals 1/4 x plus 1/4, and then subtract 2, and you get y equals 1/4 x minus 1 3/4. But as you can see, the slope is still here right in front of x. It's 1/4. Okay, the directions here are a little bit wordy, so let's go through it. Write an equation in slope-intercept form. That's important that we highlight that so we get the correct answer. For the line that passes through 4, 5 and is parallel to the line described by y equals 5x plus 10. So if it's parallel to y equals 5x plus 10, parallel to means the same slope. So I know that my slope is going to be 5. And I was given a point as well. So if I have a point and a slope, even though it asks me to put it in slope-intercept form, it's easier for me to start, if I have a point and a slope, just start with point-slope form. Y minus y1 equals m parentheses x minus x1. Because this is a lot easier to plug in that point in my slope here. So y minus y1, well, that's coming from the y value in the ordered pair, so 5. So y minus, and then the number right there. M is 5, and then x minus, and my number from the ordered pair, which is 4. And I would stop here if it's asking for point-slope form, but it's not, so I'm going to have to keep going. So I'm going to distribute. Y minus 5 equals, the first step is to distribute 5x minus 20. 5 times 4 is 20. And then my last step is to isolate y. So add 5 to both sides, and y equals 5x minus 15. So when you're writing an equation in slope-intercept form for a line that passes through a point and is parallel to, you just take the slope from the equation given. If this said, write an equation in slope-intercept form for the line that passes through 4, 5 and is perpendicular to the line described, then we would take the perpendicular slope. We would have to use our perpendicular slope of flip the sign, negative, and flip the fraction 5. 5/1 becomes 1/5. And I could do the same thing that we just did. Y minus 5 equals my perpendicular slope, -1/5, x minus 4. And I can distribute. Y minus 5 equals -1/5 x plus 4/5. And now I can add 5 to both sides. And I end up with y equals -1/5 x plus 5 4/5. Okay, so you can write an equation of a line that would be perpendicular to or parallel to. It's just a matter of taking the correct slope from the equation provided.